It's been a little while since the last video, but today we're getting back on the dyno to take a look at the effects of ignition timing. Ignition timing, or spark advance, determines when the spark plug fires in relation to the crankshaft position. And that directly affects how efficiently combustion pushes downward on each piston. Because of that, the exact timing of the spark has a direct impact on how much power the engine makes and how efficiently it burns fuel. A common tuning method is to advance timing until the engine starts to knock and then back it off a few degrees with the assumption that the best power lives right at that edge. But does it actually work that way? Does an engine really make its best power at the knock threshold? Or is it somewhere else entirely? In the previous video, we tested how air-fuel ratio affects power. If you haven't seen that, you should check it out. The link is in the description. For this test, we established a baseline at 10 degrees of spark advance. And then we increased timing incrementally throughout the range until we got to 32, which was our endpoint of our final pull. Each point represents a complete dyno pull, allowing us to evaluate how the engine responds across the entire power band. From there, we can compare the results and see where the engine actually produces the most torque. Let's start off with our 10-degree pull. Here are the results of our baseline at 10 degrees of spark advance. Horsepower is in blue and torque is in red. Peak power comes in at 318 horsepower at 5,400 RPM and 330 pound-feet of torque at 4,600 RPM. This isn't even close to where we'd normally run an engine like this, or probably any engine. But starting here gives us a clean reference point so we can see exactly what each step in timing actually does. Notice the torque curve gets really erratic above 5,000 RPM. I don't completely understand the physics behind what's going on here, but we know that this engine is not happy with only 10 degrees of spark. Next, we'll move up to 13 degrees. Now we're comparing 10 and 13 degrees. Horsepower is the purple line and torque is the tan line. This is a good example of how things often work in tuning. When you're far from optimal, even a small step in the right direction can have a big impact. Just 3 degrees of timing picked up 8 horsepower and 17 pound-feet of torque. You can see how much that torque trough around 3,000 RPM started to fill in and how the erratic behavior above 5,000 has started to settle down. Now let's go to our 16-degree dyno pull. Now we're comparing 13 and 16 degrees. Horsepower is this kind of lavender line here, and torque is just almost black. We're still a long way from optimal, so another 3 degrees still makes a massive difference. We picked up 23 horsepower and 16 pound-feet of torque. That 3,000 RPM trough continues to fill in, and the instability at higher RPM has virtually now been eliminated. Let's keep moving up to 18 degrees. Now we're comparing 16 and 18 degrees of timing. Horsepower is the grayish tan line, while torque is the purplish line up here. The gains are smaller this time, partly because we only increased timing by 2 degrees, and partly because we are not quite as grossly outside of optimal as we were when we started. We picked up about 7 horsepower and 3 pound-feet of torque. There's a noticeable gain at low RPM down here, and a couple small dips up here around peak torque that have started to fill in. Let's keep climbing the ladder and jump up to 20 degrees. Now we're comparing 18 and 20 degrees. Horsepower is in olive green, and torque is in the aqua blue. We're still seeing noticeable gains here, about 5 horsepower and 5 pound-feet. That 3,000 RPM trough that we picked up on our last pull is now gone, and we've picked up power across the entire RPM range again. Let's move on up to 22 degrees. For our 22-degree pull, horsepower is in the purple and torque is in the pink. Like we've seen in the previous steps, we're still making small changes to the shape of the curve. New peaks are forming and those valleys are continuing to fill in. It's also worth noting as we get into the low to mid 20s, we're getting close to where an engine like this will typically run at wide open throttle from the factory. Let's keep climbing. 24 degrees is next. Now at 24 degrees, you can see the gains are starting to taper off as we get closer to the optimal point where this engine wants to run. This time we only picked up about 2 horsepower and roughly 1.5 pound-feet of torque. Let's keep going and see what happens. 26 degrees is next. At 26 degrees, the gains continue to diminish. We picked up about 0.5 horsepower and roughly 1.2 pound-feet of torque. At this point, the lines are really starting to lay over each other. But let's keep going. 28 degrees is next. Now we're comparing 26 and 28 degrees. I want to bring your attention to the torque curve. Reddish brown is 26 degrees and forest green is 28. This is the first time that we actually start to lose power in some areas. At 28 degrees in spark advance, there is a small drop right around peak torque and just after. We saw timing reshape the curve on the way up. Now we're seeing the same thing as we start to go over the top. Even so, most of the curve is still showing tiny gains. So we keep going. 30 degrees is next. Now we're comparing 28 and 30 degrees. 30 is the pinkish purple line, and this is clear. We have lost power everywhere. We're no longer gaining. Timing is now working against the engine. From a tuning standpoint, this is where you stop and go back the other direction. But this is for a test. We're going to keep going. Let's add 2 more degrees and do 1 more pull. Now, looking at 32 degrees. 32 is the olive gray line, and 30 is still the pinkish purple. There are a few small areas where the engine didn't completely hate those extra 2 degrees. Didn't exactly love them either. It didn't gain anything. But at peak torque, we lost 9 pound-feet, and we lost an average of 5 pound-feet from about 3,700 RPM all the way to 5,800. And here's something really important. We still haven't hit knock. I don't know exactly where we would find it on this engine, but my educated guess says somewhere in the mid-30s, maybe as high as like 37 degrees. So we're still a few degrees away from knock, and we've not only lost power from where the engine wants to be, we've even lost power compared to the factory timing table. It's true, some engines are knock limited, meaning they will knock before you ever reach optimal timing like we did here today. But clearly, that's not what's happening here. And most naturally aspirated engines are not knock limited unless you're dealing with very high compression, very low octane fuel, or something else going on. So based on this, the idea of advance timing until it knocks and then dial it back a couple degrees, it doesn't hold up. It's not a reliable way to tune an engine. If you want to do this correctly, you need a dyno to actually see where the engine makes power. Now, approaching this like a tuner, what we really want to know is what spark advance actually produces the best torque at each RPM. Up to this point, we've been moving in 2-degree increments, so we still don't know the exact answer to this. But we do know it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 to 30 degrees. So we're going to go back and refine that. We're going to test at 27 degrees and 29 degrees and see how these overlay. All right, we've got our refinement poles loaded, 27, 28, 29, and 30 degrees. I've rescaled the graph so we can actually see the small differences, and I've removed the horsepower lines to keep things clear. Right away, we can see that 30 degrees isn't helping us anywhere. So we're going to drop that. 29 does beat 28 in a few spots, but it's never the highest line anywhere in the RPM range. So we can eliminate that one too. That leaves us with 27 and 28 degrees. 28 has a very slight advantage in a couple of spots, about half a pound-foot just before 3,000 RPM, and even less right around 4,100. But 27 is clearly stronger in several areas, especially from about 4,400 to redline. So for this engine, 27 is our number. You could blend a little 28 in a few spots if you are chasing every last fraction of power output. But for the vast majority of use cases, I just run 27 across the board here. So what did we actually learn here? First, more timing does not always mean more power. There is a very specific point where the engine makes the most torque for the amount of air and fuel it has. In tuning, that is called MBT, or maximum brake torque. MBT is the exact point where the engine is most efficient at turning combustion into torque. And once you go past it, timing actually starts working against you. Second, you will find MBT before knock most of the time on a naturally aspirated engine, which means the myth of advancing timing until it knocks and then backing it off a little is busted completely. And finally, we learned the only reliable way to actually find MBT is with data. You're not going to feel 1 degree of timing on the street, but the dyno shows you exactly where the engine wants to be. Now, in the last video, we looked at air-fuel ratio. In this one, we dialed in spark advance. So in the next video, we're going to put it all together. We're going to compare this C5 Z06 Corvette's stock calibration to what we've built here on the dyno. If you want to see that, make sure you've subscribed. Thanks for watching.